Morning. Nice to see you, City Church, and many visitors as well, I know. I'm here this morning to talk about the Darwin fish, and there will be no introductory flannel, no Bible reading, not that that is introductory flannel, but, no prayer at the beginning. We're going to get straight into it because I don't have long, but I'm here to talk about this. Could you wave at me if you've seen that on the back of a car at one point? Could you wave at me if you've seen it on the back of a car and gone, it's a kind of clever little idea. That some of you might have seen it and think, I don't understand. I don't know, what's the joke? I don't understand. So the joke is, for those who are troubled, because we're going to talk about it for a while, the joke is that the fish is the symbol of Christianity, for reasons we won't go into, but it had been for about 2,000 years. And then somebody thought, hey, we could put the word Darwin in the middle of the fish and give it legs and then show that somehow Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has undermined the credibility of Christianity. And so they put it on the back of cars and you're driving along and you go, and that's what we all do. And I quite often do it. I've even done it on my way to preach on issues like this before, just seen them sitting there on the backs of cars on the motorway. And as I understand it, the Darwin fish is saying this: Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has undermined or destroyed the credibility of Christianity. And that's why I'm reading it. If it means something else, I apologize to the person who made it. I think that you just misled me, at least. I didn't get it, but that's what I think it means, and I'm going to assume it does. And that's what Richard Dawkins thinks, hence the fact that he's included in the title as well, famous atheist Richard Dawkins. So we're calling Darwin, Dawkins, and the divine. We're really saying, is the Darwin fish true? Is it true that Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has destroyed or undermined the credibility of Christian belief? Is that the case or not? And so I'm just simply going to ask, is it? Is that true? Has Darwin's theory undermined Christianity or not? And would come at this, I guess, by asking very early on, making a slightly obvious point, which is that if it's not true, if Darwin's theory is not true, then it hasn't undermined Christianity and it hasn't undermined anything. And I imagine we'd be on board with that. If Darwin's theory is wrong, then it hasn't undermined Christianity. And most of us would probably think, okay, I think I'm just about with you on that one. Yes, I can see that. Sometimes theories get proposed, they have very little evidence, they're wrong, and they pose no challenge whatsoever to any other system of thought, religious or otherwise. So here's a quote from a guy called Francis Crick, who many of you have heard of. He co-discovered the double helix structure of DNA, possibly the 20th century's most important scientific discovery, and so he's one of the world's cleverest men. But he was also a bit odd in some ways. And this is his theory, and I suggest that this theory makes no challenge to any sort of belief system. Francis Crick's theory was, life on Earth may have begun when aliens sent a rocket ship containing spores to seed the Earth. At which point I say, two things follow from that quote. One, a theory does not disprove another system of thought just by being a theory. Two, it is possible to be a Nobel Prize-winning scientist and a dum-dum at the same time. Yeah? That's my premise from that quote. Just be careful. You're an authority in that field, but I'm not sure that you're an authority in this one at that point. So that's just a stupid example. The point is, if Darwin was wrong, just like if Francis Crick is wrong with his theory, it doesn't disprove anything. It doesn't undermine Christianity, and I imagine most of us are okay with that. The question that tends to bother people a bit more is, if Darwin's theory was right, if evolution by natural selection is true, does that fatally undermine Christian belief? Does that destroy faith in God as the Christians understand it? Is the Darwin fish true if Darwin's theory is right? And the Darwin fish now will loiter for us at the bottom right-hand corner just to remind us what we're on. The question is that Darwin fish true if evolution by natural selection is true? And Richard Dawkins says, yes, it does. We've been waiting for it for a long time. The argument that will knock down Christian belief and ensure that none of us have to do what those nasty, oppressive religious people tell us to do anymore. And the argument, here it is, Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. It's incompatible with Christian belief. If Darwin is right, Christianity is wrong. If Christianity is right, Darwin is wrong, but the two cannot both be right. A lot of Christians agree. A lot of Christians would say, Christianity is right, so evolution must be wrong. A lot of atheists say evolution is right, so Christianity must be wrong, and I disagree. I disagree with the premise. I disagree with the Darwin fish, and I want to explain why. I don't agree that it is the case that if evolution by natural selection is true, there is no validity to Christian belief. I just don't think that's right. So I think the best way of approaching the question, and what we'll do, as I said, Tom said, is we'll have 15 minutes on this, and then we'll take some questions. Probably only have time for 3 or 4 because we've got a lot to pack in, obviously, this morning, and then I'll speak for a bit longer afterwards. So I think the best way of approaching why is the Darwin fish true and how might we know is to ask this question. Why might somebody think it was true? On what basis might somebody say Darwin has destroyed Christian belief with his theory? And I think the answer is, I think there's probably 5 different answers that people might bring to the table on this one and say, actually, here's 5 things I think must follow from Darwin's theory that debunk Christian belief. So I just want to look at what they are. 4 of them will be quite brief. The 5th one takes a little longer. And so I gave a lot of thought to it. I thought, I think these are the reasons why people put the Darwin fish on the back of their car. The first one might be because Charles Darwin's theory proved that the earth was billions of years old and Christians believed it was only thousands of years old. And that's undermined Christian belief. I think that's a major reason why some people would believe evolution destroyed Christianity. But at both levels, both in its understanding of science and its understanding of Christianity, I think that's flawed. I think it's flawed because I don't actually think the Bible tells us how old the earth is, for all sorts of reasons, which we might go into in the questions. I don't think the Bible, certainly there is no verse in the Bible that says, and the earth is X thousand years old at the time of writing. It just doesn't do that. And also on the scientific side, it's also a misunderstanding of what Charles Darwin's theory did and where it fitted into the story, because modern geology, which was saying, this rock is extremely old. Have you seen? It's practically got a beard. Look how old it is. People were doing that a long time before Charles Darwin, probably about 80 or 90 years before Charles Darwin's theory and his book, The Origin of Species, was published just 153 years ago. But even before that happened, people were saying, no, the world, the rocks of the world are much older than a few thousand years old. And Charles Darwin's theory, if you like, came in towards the tail end of a period where people were saying, goodness, the world looks old. In fact, Darwin didn't say the world is billions of years old at all. I don't think they thought in terms of billions at that point. But it might have been millions, and it might have been 100,000 years old, but it was always, they were scientifically understanding it as being significantly older than a few thousand. And as a result, it's just not historically accurate to say that Charles Darwin's theory prompted people to say, the earth is very, very old, and until then, we'd all thought it was just a few thousand years old. So I think both in its understanding of the Bible and in its understanding of the history of science, that claim doesn't work. The Darwin fish is not true for debunking the age of the earth. The age of the earth has been talked about as being much older than that for a lot longer than Charles Darwin's been around and his book's been around to read. The second reason is related. The second reason people might say the Darwin fish was true is because it proved, for a lot of people, it proved that death was in the world before human beings existed. And that would be another major claim. So Darwin's theory proves things died, and Christians don't believe that, and scientists do as a result of Darwin's theory. But again, it doesn't actually do justice either to Scripture or to the Christian Scriptures or to scientific evidence or to scientific history, really. Both on the Christian side, it doesn't do justice to it because the Bible talks about human beings falling and human beings being separated from God and experiencing death. But it doesn't actually say, oh, no animals died before the fall took place. And in fact, it quite explicitly does say that human beings were supposed to go and eat plants and that there was a lot of death in that sense in the world before human beings sinned. So from a biblical point of view, I don't think it quite has the challenge that people think it does. But from a scientific point of view, it's not quite right either to say that Darwin proved that death was in the world before human beings existed, because people were discovering dinosaur fossils quite a while before Charles Darwin, and people were saying this dinosaur has been around a long time before a human being. So Mosasaurus was discovered in 1764, 95 years before Charles Darwin wrote his book. And people are saying, look, there's this massive creature, and it was clearly didn't coexist with a human being. It's very, very old, and it lived and it died a long time before human beings came on the scene. So Charles Darwin is not responsible for bringing that idea into the scientific world. People believed that a long time before Charles Darwin. So again, I don't think the Darwin fish stacks up at that point. The third reason why people might put a Darwin fish on their car or believe it was true is because they would say Darwin's theory of evolution stopped Christians from reading the Bible, and particularly Genesis, literally. Now, that would be quite a big claim made at that point. And I would just say that isn't actually the case at all. People have been reading Genesis 1 as if it was not necessarily a literal chronological account for a lot longer than Charles Darwin. So Origen, the church father in 220-ish AD, we don't quite know exactly when, but it was certainly a long time before Charles Darwin, Origen wrote this of Genesis chapter 1. He said, "What person of intelligence, I ask," and some of you will find this offensive, but I'm not saying you're unintelligent. Origen is hinting at it, but it's not coming from me. I'm just saying, what person of intelligence, I ask, will consider as a reasonable statement that the first and the second and the third day, in which there are said to be both morning and evening, existed without sun and moon and stars, while the first day was even without a heaven? I don't think anyone will doubt that these are figurative expressions which indicate certain mysteries through a semblance of history. Now, the fact is a lot of people do doubt it, and a lot of us will actually say, I'm not sure Origen's right about that. Let's do some theological study to work out if he is. My point is, though, Origen was writing 1,600 years before Charles Darwin. He was saying, I don't read Genesis as a literal chronological account, and it's not because he'd been handbagged by some guy from Christ College, Cambridge, who had a huge beard. It's because he'd come to that conclusion just from reading the text and coming to conclusions about what it must mean. And in that sense, it's not true that Charles Darwin popped up, and until that point, everyone had said, goodness, the earth is this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and it's only 6,000 years old. And then Darwin spoke, and everybody went, wow, it's billions of... That's not the way it works. In fact, many people have been saying that. Augustine was another one who had said for a long time before Charles Darwin, I'm just not sure that the text is intended to be read quite that way. And you may or may not agree with Origen. And many of us, I'm sure, don't. But that doesn't, in some ways, that doesn't matter. The point is, Origen was saying this a long time before Charles Darwin and certainly Richard Dawkins. So that's the third reason. And I don't think that one works either. The fourth reason why people might say Darwinism has destroyed Christian belief is they say Darwinism actually laid the foundation for modern atheism. So, and this story is fairly simplistic, but it goes like this. The whole world in Europe was Christians. Darwin wrote a book that decimated Christian belief, and almost everybody in Europe became atheists. That's the sort of straw man version of it. But you kind of get that. Even David Attenborough and some of the stuff he says on some of the shows he's made kind of implies that everyone in the world was a Christian until Charles Darwin, and then they suddenly chucked out the Christian version and embraced a different one. But again, it's not really how it happened. The high noon, if you like, of modern atheism happened probably 60 or 70 years before Charles Darwin. Atheism in Europe was at its most robust and most feisty and strongest, if you like, until the recent resurgence with some of the popular paperbacks about it, probably in about the 1780s, 1790s. And so it was that the coming second half of the European Enlightenment associated with men like Voltaire and David Hume and Diderot and others, and they were writing these wonderful atheist tirades and saying that we must bring down the church. And then eventually the French Revolution, of course, managed it and toppled the church, and they quite literally went into Notre Dame, the big, huge cathedral in Paris. It's a stunning building. They desecrated it, and they said, this will now be the temple of reason, because we have displaced the God of the Bible with the God of reason. And as a result, we can quite proudly say there is no God. He's been defeated by human thinking. And that was in 1789 to 1793. And then it was restored and so on, and Notre Dame is now lovely to go and visit again. But that just, I think, should put something in a bit of context. That's 60 or 70 years before Darwin writes The Origin of Species. Darwin, in many ways, his theory comes in at the tail end of a period of a high point of European intellectual history in which atheism is seen as being very valid. And at the end, towards the end of that period, Darwin comes in as a Victorian man and writes off the back of that. He doesn't cause atheism. It's not like everyone was going, we worship God, and then Darwin wrote a book and everyone, oh, no, we don't. We worship whatever. That isn't quite the way it worked at all. And I think it's sometimes been put around, and in popular culture, people might read the story that way. But it just isn't the way that things happened as a statement of intellectual history, that atheism preceded and in many ways caused Darwin's theory at one level rather than being a result of it. And when his book was published, lots of Christians and church leaders actually embraced his theory and said, we think this is true, and we think it's incompatible with the Bible. Lots of people here might disagree, but that's what a lot of early Christian leaders said at the time. So those are four reasons. I don't think they're the biggest ones, but they might be reasons why the Darwin fish could be true. The fifth reason, which I think is the biggest one, which needs a little bit more thought, is this. The theory is effectively, we know now, because of Darwin's theory, we know how complex life developed, and therefore there is no need for God. God was simply a way of explaining things about the world we didn't understand, and now we understand them, so what's the need for God? And that, I think, would be a common way of the Darwin fish being expressed. Darwin has replaced Jesus, or the Christian God, as a means of explaining the fact that there are beings like us in this room. And for Dawkins, that's encapsulated in the idea, which he often says, Darwin's theory destroyed the illusion of design. But that's what he's saying, what I've just said. He's saying that Darwin has the right to replace Jesus in the middle of the fish, and the fish can grow legs, because actually Darwin's theory made it clear that we don't need a designer, because a personal explanation is ruled out by a physical explanation. We understand how it works, so we don't need the person anymore. I want to challenge that a moment and say, is that actually true? Is it true that discovering a physical process that causes something rules out a personal explanation being behind the same phenomenon? Is that true? Because I don't think it is. I think it's actually a very questionable idea, but it's quite common. We understand the how, and as a result, there is no need for a personal agent behind it. I just don't think that's the case. And take the example of falling in love. Okay, so let's say men and women fall in love. This is a lovely age-old idea, as old as the Bible. Wonderful idea, men and women fall in love. And you might ask the question, so do people actually fall in love, or is it simply a result of hormones, chemicals in their brain that makes them feel, she's walking across the room? Is that simply a result of a chemical combination in your brain, or do people actually fall in love with each other? Which is it? And some of you might say, well, no, it's both. But just imagine this for a moment. Imagine a few thousand years ago, there was a sacred text called the Bible, which said, men and women fall in love. It's beautiful and poetic, and it gives life meaning. And then in the medieval period, scholars like Thomas Aquinas were writing books saying, it's wonderful, men and women fall in love, and it's powerful and meaningful and delightful and all of these things. And then imagine that a guy with a huge beard called Charles Darwin wrote a book in 1859 that said, do you know what? Hormones actually cause this experience we know as falling in love. The process of what we call falling in love is actually a chemical reality. It's something that goes on in people's brains. And as a result of those chemicals, and let's say Darwin had labored the point and said, this doesn't mean there's no such thing as love, it just means this is how it works. Because Charles Darwin actually said, I don't think my theory leads people to be atheists at all. You can be a believer in God and an evolutionist. Charles Darwin said that himself, and many have agreed. But let's say he'd done that about love. He said, hormones work like this. He'd explained the mechanics of it, and as a result, he said, that's how love works, but it doesn't replace the need for love. But then let's say 150 years after that, in 2006, Richard Dawkins had written a best-selling paperback that sold all across the world called The Love Delusion. And let's say in that book, he had claimed that love was a complete fiction of the imagination. It's only for people who need a crutch because they're so sad about getting through life, they're just a bit romantic, oh, I believe in love, I believe in love. Now, you don't have to force the wedge issue that way because you might have listened to S Club 7. If you have, you're fine. Because S Club 7, baby, loving you comes easily to me. It's what I'm living for. It's all in the chemistry. And you think, wow, I don't have to choose between hormones and love. I might be able to believe in both because it's... Now, those of you who are not S Club 7 fans, I'm so sorry. You haven't lived. S Club 7, I love it. S Club 7 came on just as I was at university, so it was a very formative time in my life. I watched a lot of music videos and big fan. S Club. But anyway, they came up with this profound point, which Richard Dawkins has not seen, which is that it is possible to believe both in love and in hormones at the same time. Because a chemical or physical explanation of a phenomenon does not rule out the viability of a personal explanation of the same phenomenon. So you have, it's by chemicals, it's by hormones, does not rule out that people fall in love. You're just saying, well, the way that this happens is through this process. But the two explanations fit. They're not rivals. And I imagine most of us today believe in hormones and believe in love. And I'm glad about that. And I think if you use belief in hormones to destroy belief in love, I think we'd lead actually quite empty lives. Because we'd just be deterministic about the way we felt, and it would be very sad. And I don't think many of us do. We still believe in poetry and romance at the same time as believing in chemistry. And I say, brilliant, well done. And I think exactly the same holds true for belief in evolution and belief in God. You can look at a process, you can say there is a physical cause, but that does not rule out the personal cause behind it either, and it's perfectly valid to believe in both. So if I walked in today and I had a black eye, some of my well-meaning friends, I know a lot of people in the church, and a lot of people come up and say, how did you get your black eye? And I might say, my flesh made contact with a harder and more robust object than my flesh, and as a result, blood vessels burst and capillaries were damaged, and so my tissue is now working overtime to try and repair the eye, which is why I have a semblance of a black eye. And a lot of you would say, well, that's a physical explanation, but it doesn't explain why you have a black eye. How did you get your black eye? And I say, oh, sorry, I made fun of Hugh. And then you'd all go, oh, okay. And Hugh is the South African guy at the front whose shoulders are like out here, okay? And you would say, okay, that personal explanation is not like the first explanation was untrue. It's just a different type of explanation for the same phenomenon, isn't it? You say there's a personal explanation and a physical explanation. And they're compatible. Love and hormones. Is it because of capillaries or is it because of Hugh? Is it because of God or is it because of evolution? And you might say both. And I don't think there's anything intellectually incoherent about saying that. So Richard Dawkins disagrees. Richard Dawkins says, no, the physical explanation has destroyed, and so does Stephen Hawking, has destroyed the personal explanation. There is no need for it any longer. But I just don't think that's the way we normally think about any physical causality where persons or people might be involved. Why do we say persons? The only time you say persons are persons of the Trinity, and 8 persons are allowed in this lift. And every other time you say people. I never understood that. If anyone knows, please come and talk to me afterwards. It'll get me off the hook from some other questions I will raise, no doubt, in the course of this talk. But Richard Dawkins would say, it rules it out. You cannot have physical cancels personal. And that was, I guess, is expressed in a very interesting and slightly comic way by a man who I think is a genius, a brilliant writer. He's dead now. His name is Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and other stories. Brilliant writer, very funny guy. And he said something which Richard Dawkins put on the inside cover of his book, The God Delusion. And he said this: isn't it enough, he's an atheist, Douglas Adams, he said, isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful without having to believe there are fairies at the bottom of it too? And that's almost an expression of this idea. You can look at a material thing, but you don't have to suppose that some personal agent is involved. So you look at a garden, you say, it's beautiful. Why invent the fairies? Just get rid of the fairies and enjoy the garden. Sounds good, right? But I would come back and say, to me, that quote is at risk of being a colossal own goal. Because if I go and see a beautiful, I don't know where the most beautiful gardens near here are. Hever Castle, I don't know if you, Chartwell maybe, I'm not sure. The nearest places that I've been to. But you go to a beautiful garden, you do not enter the garden and say, the garden is beautiful, behold, there must be fairies. Instead, whether you use this language or not, you come in and you say, the garden is beautiful, behold, there must be gardeners. And people go, yes, actually, the fact that there is a garden that is beautiful, the difference between a garden that's beautiful and a wilderness that's not is that there's a gardener in a garden and there's not in a wilderness. And so for me, this is a very self-defeating quote, but this says, no, when you see something of beauty and majesty and intricacy and exquisite design, you come in and say, that garden must be designed by a gardener. So if you go to the Palace of Versailles and you walk in and say, don't believe in fairies, everybody goes, neither do I. If you go into the Palace of Versailles and don't believe in gardeners, everybody goes, you're an idiot. Look around you. That everywhere you look, there is evidence of a gardener. And I think Douglas Adams has shot himself in the foot with this quote, and Richard Dawkins has too by putting it in his book, because it clearly leads, the analogy's just not been thought through properly, has it? You don't believe in fairies. Fairies don't need to be there for the garden to exist. But you do believe in gardeners. And so as a result, I think that this argument, this fifth reason that complex life has been explained so there's no need for God, I think it falls. I don't think there's any reason to say that Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has destroyed the credibility of Christian belief. So I don't believe in the Darwin fish. But at this point, I'm going to pause and take some questions, because there may be many who disagree, and somebody who clearly disagrees right there. There may be many who disagree, so or may just want clarity on some of the things I'm saying. I'm going to guess we probably only have time for 3 or 4, just because of the number of things we're going to go through this morning, but it'd still be helpful to have those coming through if we have any, and so I will turn around and hope that we do, and if we don't, we'll just chat. How can we reconcile the Bible's account of God creating the universe and the most current scientific accounts of evolution? Okay, that's a really good question. There are, and it's a complex question to answer briefly. There are several models, if you like, several ways of doing it. The one that I personally prefer, I think when you read Genesis chapter 1, you have to decide what kind of writing are you dealing with. Is Genesis chapter 1 dealing with is it a historical, literal account that goes, chup, 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 this all happened in the following order, and was it intended by the author to be taken as a chronological account of 6 24-hour days, or was it the equivalent of almost like a song, or had some poetic elements, or what kind of writing are we dealing with? And you always have to ask that question when you're reading the Bible. I gave the example in the first meeting, and people seem to get it, so I'll use it again. If you read Luke chapter 3, verse 1, it says, in the year that so-and-so was in charge of this place, and he was in charge of that place, and this happened here, and this province was over there, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah. And you and I read that and say, this guy's writing a historical account. He's earthing it in the real world, in places, times, dates. He's wanting to be very clear. If you read Song of Songs, chapter 4, and it says, your breasts are dates, then you and I don't read that and think, what an odd woman. And you try and imagine it, right? You say, he must be saying something about the comparison between a breast and a date, and I don't even want to speculate what it is. Is it tastiness? I'm not really sure, but either way, something about your breast makes me want to, anyway, let's not go there. And so you read it, and you know that the type of writing is of a different nature to Luke chapter 3, verse 1. Because you're saying, what's the author trying to convey? And you don't believe the author's contradicted himself if in Song of Songs 4 he says that breasts are dates, and then later he says they're fawns. You don't think, breasts, dates, or fawns? Are they scampering in the forest, or are they sticky and tasty? Which are they? And you guys aren't reading Song of Songs wondering that, because you guys know that it's a poetic image to try and say something that we won't go into at this point about breasts. Okay? Now, I'm using an example. Lots of students in the church always do that. But the point is, you have to make that decision every time you read a piece of scripture. And so for me, I read Genesis chapter 1, and although I don't think it's a poem like Song of Songs is, I do think it's exalted prose, approaching the level of poetry. I think it almost functions like a song. It's incredibly rhythmic, and in lots of ways. It is a different type of writing, and I think Genesis 1 to chapter 2, verse 3 is an overture, a big song saying God created everything, and here's just the splendor of what he did, and it uses a 6-day structure to explain what God did without it being intended to be taken in a 24-hour day structure. That's my view. You may disagree, that's fine. That's just, for me, I'm then reading that and saying, so that's not telling me how long it took to create these things, and therefore, actually, I'm happy to look at the theory of evolution and say, that to me seems like the best scientific research available, saying this is how God caused this diversity of life, and therefore, I'm quite happy to embrace that almost the whole way. And so that's just me. That's not this church. That doesn't have to be your view. It's just how I would do it. There are many other ways of doing it, and others could give better defenses of other views. But I hope that's a helpful start for thinking that one through. Okay, next one. If evolutionary theory states that humanity evolved, and if there is evidence to support this, how can we accept the Bible's claim that God uniquely made man and woman out of the dust and in his image? Great question. Well, this is very good. Okay. So evolutionary theory is making some claims about the way that human beings came to be, and the questioner is asking, does that not conflict with the way that the Bible accounts human beings as coming to be? I think the question at this point then becomes, so what does it mean for man to be made in the image of God? Does the fact that God made man in his image mean that God did not make man out of some pre-existing material? In fact, everybody believes God did make man out of pre-existing material, because if you could take the word dust literally as saying it's a clod of earth, or you could take dust as an equivalent of our word stuff or matter and say God made him out of a pre-existing kind of creature. But either way, you're actually affirming God created man out of something. You're saying, though, what makes that person human is that God has breathed the breath of life into him, and the man became a living soul, and this person is conferred the image of God. That's what you and I are saying about. And then you're saying that the woman is made out of the side of the man, so the two are equally bearers of God's image. And so I think if you were to say that's what makes somebody human, it's the image of God, it's the breath of God, it's being a spiritual, soulful being that is no longer simply an animal, but has actually been conferred great dignity, intelligence, and revelation, and desire to worship God. You see a lot of similarities between advanced primates and human beings, but you don't find them singing songs of worship like we did this morning. And you don't actually find them farming or tilling fields, and you don't find them writing letters to one another. You don't find them using language and denoting abstract concepts. There are many, many other things that separate us from any other type of creature. And as we look at those things that separate us, we'd say the fact that I bear the image of God is not necessarily just because I've been created in fact, I wasn't created out of thin air. God made me, just like he made you, fashioned together in a mother's womb. But there were natural processes used in order to get the mother's womb going, and many of you will know what they are, and those who don't, this isn't the right time. But you see, the fact that something is done by God doesn't mean it doesn't have a natural mechanism in order to make it. Now, so again, some will disagree. Some will say, no, I think that's incompatible. We had a great time discussing it, even just as the leaders of the church and me were talking some of this stuff through yesterday. It's a good question. But I personally don't think that's at all incompatible. I think man and woman is made exclusively in the image of God, and for me that's not incompatible with the theory of evolution, personally. But some would disagree, but I'll just throw it out there. We should just take one more, and then I'll crack back on. Thanks. If the account of Adam and Eve rebelling against God in Genesis is poetic, how can you account for the presence of evil and suffering in the world? Very good. These are very good questions. I don't think that the whole account of Genesis 1 to 11 is poetic. I think Genesis 1:1 to 2:3, and I wouldn't even say it was poetic, actually. I would say it's exalted prose. It's more like, it's halfway between poetry and prose, in my reading of it. And that from Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, the style changes quite sharply, and we're dealing with history, I believe. So I believe that Adam and Eve, in that sense, that the fall, I take the fall completely literally. I believe that human beings did actually make a deliberate decision in a real garden in Mesopotamia, which is where modern-day Iraq is now, and they decided to do something that had catastrophic consequences for all subsequent members of the human race. I believe that. So I don't take it poetically, and I believe that evil is in the world as a result of that, and the death of human beings is in the world as a result of that. I don't, however, I don't believe that all animals and creatures that die because as a subsequent result of the fall. If nothing else, I would say that in Genesis itself, man is given a commission to go and eat plants before the fall. And so we know that there's death and things are going to be decaying and digesting. The sun is built and the sun gradually decays. It gets smaller in order to give energy to other things. So I think there is what you might call decay or death built into creation from the very start. And I don't think that's evil. I think evil is a loaded term that says this is a bad thing. And I don't think those things are necessarily bad things. But the death of human beings is a bad thing, and it was not in the creation at the beginning. And when man is breathed in the image of God, he's not intended to die. And he does, because he sins. And so sin at that level, sin and death came in with the fall. And I would take the account of Genesis 3 very literally in that sense, because I think the writer intends me to. That's my view. Again, some would disagree. I know that's just raising a whole bunch of questions, and I hope that those little answers are helpful, and you can come and talk afterwards if you've got more questions. And because, as I said, we spent time yesterday talking about it, all the people who teach here as well are now all thinking about this rabidly and losing sleep over it. So we're just having a discussion. I'm not speaking for the church here. I'm just saying this is my way of reading it. But off the back of some of those answers, I now want to ask you a question. And I want to ask you this question whether you're someone who follows Jesus now or not, but particularly if you don't, particularly if you're visiting, you're checking it out, you're looking in, you're thinking it through. I want to ask you a question. From your point of view, how did we get here? Why are we here today? How did we get here? So a lot of people in the world today would say, well, we're here because of the Big Bang and then evolution. And I would say, okay, let's grant that that's true, right? It may or may not be. Science is contingent, it changes. But let's say it's true. How did we get here? How did the Big Bang lead to planets and stars as they are? And a lot of people have just never really thought about that question. They said, well, I don't know, maybe it's just fortunate that it did. Maybe just that there was a bang and it could have come out in any shape and it might not have supported life, but in fact it did. And it was just lucky that we ended up here. And I found there's actually only really three answers people give. If you say, how did we get here? How did that come about? People really only answer one of three things, almost no matter how much you read on this issue. They say either it's a result of luck, or they say it's a result of there being billions and trillions of different universes and we live in the one where life happened. Or you say there's a creator God who designed it. And those three answers, almost no matter how much you read on this issue, you'll find they come up all the time, and there's pretty much no alternative as far as I'm aware. Luck, a multiverse, billions and billions of universes, or a creator. I just want to ask you to think about that for a minute and just think, which one do you believe at the moment? Have you thought about it? Have you given some thought to how we got here? So the first answer is we're just very lucky. There was a big explosion. The universe was very, very tiny, and then it exploded and became absolutely huge. And it formed planets and stars, and it might not have, but it did. And instinctively, that's, I think, where a lot of people are today. We're a lucky accident. But here's the thing. For our universe to be possible, for planets and stars to be possible, let alone life, let's leave life out of it for now, let's just say for planets to be possible, requires 15 different numbers to be exactly what they are. And those numbers at the moment, as far as we're aware, are independent from one another. And those 15 numbers have to be exactly what they are for planets and stars to be possible. Now, you might say, what numbers? What are you talking about? Well, this quote might help you. So this is a guy called Francis Collins, who was the director of the Human Genome Project. So he mapped the genome and then said, right, I've done that. People have been trying to do that for many, many years. I've done that, and now I'm going to go and work for Barack Obama, which he now does, as one of the chief science advisor for Barack Obama. So a very, very clever man, cleverer than all of the people in this room put together, no offense. I mean, he's bright. This is his statement of the idea I've just said. He said that the universe looks as if it knew we were coming. There are 15 constants, which is just a fancy word for a number, that have precise values. If any one of those constants was out by even 1 part in a million, or in some cases by 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to the point where we see it. Matter would not have been able to coalesce. There would have been no galaxy, stars, planets, or people. So it's saying 15 different numbers, all to the tuning of 1 in a million, or in some cases more. And the way I'd explain that is, imagine you have a game of roulette, and there are 15 wheels, and those wheels have 1 million numbers each. Right? And you come up to the roulette wheel and you say, for the universe to exist, I have to spin this wheel and a 1 in a million shot that it's going to land on the right one. And so you spin it, it goes, you go, yes, that was lucky, 1 in a million. Whoop, on we go. The universe is still possible. And then you bring the second one, yes, still there. 2 1 in a million shots. And at this point, you're starting to think, this is rather fortunate. I'm glad I came. And on you go. 3, 4, 5, all the way through. You get to number 14. It lands on exactly the right number. Francis Collins is with you at this point saying, that's amazing. 14 successive. You think of the 15th one. The 15th one doesn't have 1 million numbers. It doesn't even have 1 million numbers. It has 10 to the power 60 numbers on it. It has 1 with 60 noughts after it. And at this point, this wheel is the size of the earth. Who knows? And you spin the wheel, and it goes shum, and you go, yes. And then it goes, and you go, no, it's lost. Oh, it's 1 part out. Back to the beginning. And you crawl back, and you have to start the whole thing again. You and I think, would look at that statistical outcome and say, for those 15 numbers on a one-off hit to land exactly where they are is so preposterous that no thinking person would believe it. And yet I think an awful lot of people think just that. We're a lucky accident. John Polkinghorne, or Sir John Polkinghorne as he prefers to be known, said this, which again helped crystallize just the final roulette wheel I mentioned. For us to be possible requires a balance between the effects of expansion and contraction, which at a very early epoch in the universe's history, the Planck time, has to differ from equality by not more than 1 in 10 to the power 60. Now, are you currently marveling at that number? If you are, you're numerate. The numerate will marvel at such a degree of accuracy, and you're going, I marvel, I am numerate, I marvel. Others of you are going, what's he on about? And you are non-numerate in John Polkinghorne's terms, so he's going to patronize you by giving you an analogy. And he says, for the non-numerate, I will borrow an analogy from physicist Paul Davies of what the accuracy means. He points out, and some of you are going, what's it like? I don't know, I'm not numerate. I can count, but that's pretty much it. He says, it's the same as aiming at a target an inch wide on the other side of the observable universe, 20,000 million light years away, and hitting the mark. Now, I think for the non-numerate amongst us, which includes me, I go, wow, that is amazing. If that's what we're dealing with, blind luck does not seem to work. As a result of statistics like that, Stephen Hawking said of the Big Bang model, which is there's one bang, and that's basically where we ended up. Stephen Hawking said, the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. I think there are clearly religious implications. And I agree with him on that. So if it isn't luck, how do we get here? Yeah? The second option is you say, well, there's trillions of universes. This is really what people do when they say, the statistics don't work with one, so if we multiply universes indefinitely, we will eventually have enough universes to make the numbers add up. And that's Richard Dawkins' answer. He said, I believe in a multiverse. I believe there's trillions of universes out there. And so we happen to be in the one where life is possible. So yeah, fine, you're spinning the wheels, but eventually in one universe, one of them will come together and you'll get a universe with life in it. At which point I say, okay, that's possible. That is possible. I think we'd agree theoretically it is possible there are other universes. But the problem is there any evidence that it's true? The answer is no. Could there ever be any evidence that it's true? I think the answer is probably no. Outside of our observable universe, is there another entity that we can't observe? Well, by definition, you can't observe it, so you can't know if it's true. So at that point, I'd say, in order to rescue the atheist perspective you have, Richard, you have created, off the top of your heads, and others have done it as well, billions and trillions of entities that you will never have any evidence for. Now, I used to be a Red Dwarf fan, and there was a robot called Crichton in Red Dwarf. If you've seen it, you'll know who it is. If you're not, this voice will sound a little bit strange. But Crichton would say, of crazy theories the guys came up with, something like this. A superlative suggestion, sir, with just 2 minor flaws, a Red Dwarf fan down there. 1, there is no evidence for it, and 2, there is no evidence for it. Now, I know that technically speaking, that's only 1 minor flaw, but I thought it was such a big one, it was worth mentioning twice. I'm with him on that. I think, what are you doing? You've got trillions. There's no need to clap. It wasn't that good. But anyway, you've got trillions of universes out there. There's no evidence for it. There is no evidence for it. That's a big problem. And as a result of that, there's a philosopher called John Leslie who has done a lot of work on, he's written a book called Universes, and he's tried to help us understand, for the non-numerate among us, how this works. And he said, imagine you've got a guy sentenced to death by firing squad. And the whole 15 guys line up and they point their rifles at his chest, and there's a bang, and the guy doesn't die. And he pauses, and he waits a couple of minutes to check he's okay, and then he takes off the blindfold, and there's nobody there. And at that point, he could think to himself, 1, that was lucky. They all just missed. Fine, off we go. Or he could think, there must be billions and trillions of different executions taking place at the moment, and I happen to be in the one where they all missed. That was lucky. Off we go. Or he could think, there's some kind of intelligence behind this process. Maybe they were bribed or drunk. And I think most of us, if that situation happened to us, would say, I think they were bribed or drunk. And that's just how we process things. We would generally prefer to see design over the multiple universe theory. In normal life, you're playing poker, the dealer gets 20 hands of straight aces. This is an analogy from philosopher Alvin Plantinga at Notre Dame. And he says, the dealer does 20 hands of straight aces. You don't say, well, every card's going to have one value. Maybe I'm just very, very unfortunate. Maybe there's multiple games of poker being played, and this is the one that happened to come out. You'd say, I think he's stuck in the shoe. And that's how most of us live life. And if you don't, you get duped more often than most people. And I think the same principles at work with this question. Luck, I'm not sure. I really don't think so. Multiverse, I really don't think so. And that's why I think most people, when faced with those choices, say, is there a third option? And I say, yes, there is. The third option is that there is a creator God who made everything in this universe and fashioned it and so to be. And that answer to the question, how do we get here, is there is There is a creator. There is a design. If you encounter something that is well crafted and suited for purpose, your general assumption is this microphone headset, this even bottle of water being here, you generally think it's unlikely that there are trillions of universes and in one of them a bottle of water appeared. You said some kind of person or intelligence has caused that to be. And that's the creator explanation. That's the explanation that there is a sovereign, all-powerful God, a good God who has made the universe as he wants it to be and has put you in it because he has a purpose for you. And actually that may or may not, that's not provable. You can't do, by doing science, you can't go, well, it's this or this, and it's not that, and it's not that. You can't prove that the luck explanation is wrong. It sounds crazy to me, but you can't prove it. You can't prove the multiverse is wrong. It also sounds crazy, but you can't prove it. You can't prove God. You just can't do that. But what you can do is to say, these two explanations sound so out there that the idea that still the vast majority of people in the world believe, and the vast majority of the great philosophers of history have believed, that there is some sort of God out there, or some gods even possibly, but some sort of God out there, sounds credible. It sounds possible at the very least. And if there is a God like that, if there is a God who made the world, if there is a God who breathed into it people like you and me, if the Christian story is even remotely close to true, if there's a personal being who's a God of love and sovereignty and beauty and grace, if that is even slightly true, I would ask you this question: if God, then what? You know, what might follow? What next? What might we do with that piece of, even that question? There might be a God, so what do I do? There might be a God, so what might that mean? What implications might that carry for the world? Does it mean that there's a purpose for the world? Does it mean there's a purpose for me? Does it mean that God might want to know me? Does it mean God might love me? Does it mean God might want to help me or rescue me or use me in a particular way? Should I not find out whether or not God, as a possible idea, has ever revealed himself to anybody about anything? And if he has, whether there's something I should be doing to respond to him? And it's to address questions like that, which I think are really pressing questions, that we run something called the Alpha Course, which I'm going to ask Matt now to come and introduce for us.
Let's give Andrew a round of applause and thank him. Thanks, Andrew. I just want to finish just a couple of minutes by talking to you about the Alpha Course. If you've not heard about Alpha, Alpha is a very short course that we run here that is about Christianity. It helps you to find out a little bit more about it. Alpha is run around the world by thousands and thousands of courses of churches, and it helps lots of people to find out more and more about Christianity and what it means. And it's a really relaxed course that we run, and it's for people who've got lots of questions. I don't know about you, maybe you came in this morning with lots of questions about God and about Christianity, maybe even about Darwin and creation and things like that. And maybe now you've got even more questions. I know for me, I sometimes have a little bit more questions when I come to church than when I came in with, and you might have more. And actually, Alpha is a brilliant way for you to come with your questions, and you can ask whatever you want. No one's going to kind of judge you in any way, shape or form, and you can ask them in a kind of relaxed way in a small group environment, and you can discuss them and find answers to your questions. Instead of in front of 200 or 300 people, you're going to be just in front of kind of 15 or 20 people. And we run our Alpha courses in a very chilled out way. We like to start with a meal, then we have a small talk, a short talk even, and then we just break into small groups and discuss what we've heard in the talk. And we find that people love to come on Alpha, and it's a great way to just find out about the Bible and about Jesus and what God has to say. And our next courses are starting in just a week's time. We've got one starting on Thursday night for students. That's going to be at Costa Coffee at 7:30. And you're really welcome to join us there. On your seats, there are some cards that look like this. You can find them. There's some pens around, and you can sign up on the back of that. There's some buckets on the way through here when we go through to the baptisms later, or on your way out, and you can put the cards through there. If you're not a student, we have a regular Alpha course that is starting a week Monday on the 30th at Morelli's. We're going to have a meal because we like to splash out a bit more, and we're going to have some live music and launch our course. Both of these evenings are just launch nights. You're not signing up for the actual course for that night, and it's just an opportunity for you to come and find out a little bit more about what Alpha is. I think what Andrew's done today is challenge us a little bit, hasn't he? Whether we came in here as a Christian or maybe you just came looking and inquiring. He's challenged us about a few things that maybe we thought we knew about God when we came in today. And I just want to challenge you with one more thing before you go. Perhaps when you came here today, you thought it was fine for your friend who brought you here or invited you to be a Christian, but for you not to be. You thought it was okay for him, but not for you. I know for me, a lot of my friends think that. They tell me it's fine for you, but it's just not for me. It's not my thing. But actually, that's not very logical. I don't think that's a very logical place to be in. You see, if Christianity is true for your friend, it's actually really very vital for you. It's got to be. That's why they invited you here. They think and believe that it's really vital for you. It's got to be of vital importance for everybody. It can't just be of importance for one or two of us and not for everyone. C.S. Lewis, the author of Narnia, put it like this. He said, Christianity is a statement which, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. It's got to be of infinite or of no importance. It can't just be somewhere in the middle. And the Alpha course gives you that opportunity to ask the questions and find answers at your pace on something that, if true, is of infinite importance to your life, that will change your life forever and is something of vital importance. And so I challenge you this morning, rather than kind of going away and thinking, I'll think about this some other time, maybe I'll do the Alpha course when I'm 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 70. Actually, this is something that could be of vital importance to you. And your friend who maybe invited you definitely believes it is of infinite importance to you. And we'd love to have you on our courses over the next few weeks. So take away this card, speak to your friend, come and find one of us afterwards. We'd love to chat to you about the course.